Hey everybody, I just got the lights turned on this morning, and today I turned out the garden tank light. It's a big bright LED in the center of the room, and it puts a huge glare on all the tanks. So I turned that out today, and we can get a little better look in the tanks at what we're looking at. And today I'm going to do a follow-up video for one I did yesterday, where we talked about my sword plants versus my Anubias plants, and I discussed how you can get a Brazilian sword for a lot less money if you simply buy it under the name Peace Lily. So I have to make at least one correction, and then I want to clarify a few other things. The first thing I want to clarify is that a Brazilian sword and a Peace Lily are the same plant. I had a few people suggesting that quite possibly there was some slight difference or some subtle variance or whatever. That's not in question in this video at all. A Peace Lily and a Brazilian sword are the same plant, identical plants. So that's the end of that discussion. There's no more worrying about whether or not they're the same plant or not. The other part of my video that does run into question, though, is I kept insisting that this plant back here, this larger one, was some type of sword that I could not identify, and despite it looking like an Anubias. And then of course this very small plant here with these little rounded sort of stubby leaves on it, that is an Anubias. And I couldn't find anywhere that would tell me what specifically the difference between an Anubias and a sword was, or how to simply identify one at a glance. And a couple of my viewers pointed out how to do that, and I was kind of hoping somebody would, and they gave me the information I needed to move forward. So here's how to tell the difference, and here's why I was wrong. I insisted this was a sword back there, and it is indeed an Anubias. I just don't know what kind. I don't remember buying it now. I did remember buying it yesterday, and my memory was the memory of me buying a plant that was labeled a sword plant, not just a loose plant at a fish store, but in one of those packages you get from the big chain stores that come pre-packaged with the little gel to keep the root systems moist. You know, I was remembering buying it in that. And obviously my memory is wrong. I'll be the first to admit that human memory is very, very unreliable and fallible. So I have no problem saying that I must be misremembering that, because the information I was given by my viewers clearly identifies this as an Anubias. Now, I had plenty of people say, oh, I think that's an Anubias, it looks like an Anubias, and, you know, that was the whole point of the video. I know it looks like an Anubias, that was the point. But two of my viewers pointed out how you can tell it's an Anubias, and that's what I needed. And here's how to tell. See that rhizome down there? And I'll show you some better examples in a minute. But I'm talking about this little section of root that comes out right here, and you can see the leaves growing up off of it. And we can come over here to my T-bar tank and have a much, much clearer look at what I mean when I'm talking about the rhizome. So we can look at this Anubias, and you can see this main, what you might call the root mass, runs along here. That big central cable looking part of the plant is the rhizome, and then you've got your leaf stems that come up, and then you've got your roots that grow down off of the rhizome. And the way this plant propagates is almost the way a tree grows. This rhizome just keeps growing out longer and longer, and as it grows, more and more leaves will pop off the top of it, just like a tree grows from the top, and the taller it gets, it develops more and more branches as it goes. This rhizome does the same thing. It just keeps growing out and out and out, and it shoots up more and more leaves as it goes. Here's another example. Sometimes it will fork and branch, and you'll get multiple rhizomes coming off of the same main rhizome. So there I could actually split that into several different plants. But that is Anubias. And all Anubias grow the same way. They all grow along that rhizome. And that is exactly what's going on with this plant. So that pretty much definitively settles it. I don't know what species of Anubias this is, but this is an Anubias. You can see that rhizome growing right there, and in fact it grows all the way along the back, and I positioned it in there. I know there's a big long rhizome on that because I put it in there and put it against that piece of wood in hopes that it eventually will attach to it. Now when you get to the Brazilian swords or the peace lilies, I don't have one ready to hand, but I can say that the peace lilies or the Brazilian swords, any kind of Amazon sword, any sword plant is going to propagate differently. It does have a rhizome, but it's just sort of a little stubby ball of a rhizome. It's more like a root ball or a bulb than a rhizome, even though it technically is a rhizome. So the way the sword plants propagate is they send out runners, very much like the way these crypts will do. So you'll get a runner that'll get sent out, and then it'll send out another root mass right here, for example, and then you'd get another rhizome, but it would be more like a root ball, and then you'd get a rosette of growth coming out of that, and then eventually it would send another runner, and then you'd get another rosette of growth growing out of that, and that's how sword plants propagate. It is technically a rhizome, and if you don't cut the runner between the two rosettes, eventually they will all just get thicker and bigger, and that whole mass is the rhizome. Even the runner connecting the two is part of the rhizome. But it does it in these steps and stages by sending out runners rather than this continuous growth of the rhizome like you see with these Anubias. So that is a quick way at a glance that you can tell the difference between a sword and an Anubias. Does it grow out of a central rosette and send out runners? It's a sword. Does it grow along a rhizome? It's an Anubias. Now again, which species are which, I don't know, but all Anubias are going to grow along that rhizome, and all the swords are going to produce those runners. Finally, I will say I did have one other person sort of seem to suggest that I've never put swords or Brazilian swords or peace lilies in my fish tanks. I'm not sure where they got that idea, perhaps because I have none in my tanks now. And the reason I have none in my tanks now is because swords aren't truly aquatic plants. They're not meant to be grown underwater, and they don't last for terribly long when grown that way. Swords are marginal plants or bog plants. They actually need to be grown emergent. You have to have at least one leaf coming up out of the water, and if you want it to flower and propagate properly and grow in its normal life cycle, then the flower needs to come up and out of the water in order for it to do that. So I've had more Brazilian swords than you can shake a stick at over the years, and they do really well in open top tanks. We can look real quickly here at my garden tank. Get the light turned back on. And you can see how I've got this iris growing up and out of the water, and once the camera adjusts, you see all those gorgeous roots down there and all that huge growth. That's what you'll see out of an Amazon sword or a peace lily, a Brazilian sword, whatever you want to call that plant. If you grow it like this, you will have fantastic success with it. If you try to grow it underwater, it'll last for a little while. You'll get maybe a couple of years out of it even, but it'll never thrive. It'll never really do its thing. You'll never get your full flowering, and in a lot of cases, you won't get any kind of longevity. I gave up because I never had a sword last me more than about a year and a half or 2 years before it just started melting away. Now, I also realized that I have very poor water for growing plants. I have no calcium or magnesium at all, and they do need some calcium and magnesium in their water. So perhaps if I tried a sword again, then I might have better luck with them. But still, they're still not fully aquatic plants. They're not meant to be grown underwater. So I have done lots and lots and lots of stuff with the Brazilian swords, the peace lilies, and other types of swords in my earlier days, and that's just one of those plants that I no longer bother with because I never had a lot of success with it. So that was it. I'm not recanting what I said about the Brazilian sword and the peace lilies being the same plant. They are, But I do need to recant what I said about my sword being a sword. It is not a sword. It is actually an Anubias. So thanks again to my viewers for pointing that out, clarifying that for me. I rely on you guys to keep me straight and keep me getting, good information out there for everybody. I don't want to lead anybody else astray. And again, I rely on you guys to keep me in line. So thanks for that. And make sure you're subscribed. That way you won't miss anything else I got coming up. You never know what it's going to be with me. And then don't forget, of course, this one here is my garden tank. And hopefully we'll see some changes coming to this one real soon. So thanks again. I'll see you on the next one.